What happens when the most notorious outlaw motorcycle club in the world takes directions from a 10-year-old boy living on the streets? They thought they were just humoring a desperate, traumatized kid. Instead, his crude charcoal map led them straight into the darkest, most terrifying crime scene in California history. The mud was, in mid-August, is an unforgiving place. The heat doesn't just warm you, it sits on your chest like a physical weight, blurring the horizon into a wavering liquid mirage. At a rundown Chevron station on the lonely outskirts of Barstow, California, 5 members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club were trying to outwait the worst of the afternoon sun. Cole Higgins, the chapter president, leaned against the scratched chrome of his customized Harley-Davidson Road Glide. At 48, Cole was a man carved from granite and bad intentions, his face a roadmap of scars and sun damage beneath a heavy salt and pepper beard. His leather cut, heavy with the legendary death head patch baked in the relentless heat. Beside him, Donnie Walsh, the chapter's sergeant-at-arms, was smoking a cigarette down to the filter, while Meat Gregory, a hulking giant of a man who looked like he wrestled bears for a living, was pouring a bottle of tepid water over his bandited head. They were dangerous men, outlaws who lived by their own code, accustomed to civilians giving them a wide berth. The Must thinks she truly knows the test. He appeared from the shimmering heat haze behind the station's rusted dumpsters. He couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. His clothes were filthy, a faded, oversized Dodgers t-shirt that hung off his skeletal frame and jeans torn at the knees. But it was his face that made Donnie stop mid-drag. The boy's left eye was swollen shut, surrounded by an ugly mosaic of purple and yellow bruising. His bare feet were blistered from the hot asphalt. "Hey, kid," Meat rumbled, his deep voice startling the boy. "You lost." The boy didn't speak. He flinched, taking a half-step back, his solitary working eye darting frantically between the massive leather-clad men. He looked like a feral animal ready to bolt. Cole pushed himself off his bike, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He raised his hand slowly, palms out, a universal gesture of peace. "Take it easy, Meat. You're scaring him." Cole crouched down, ignoring the sharp pain in his bad knee, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "Where are your folks, buddy?" The boy shook his head. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for food, even though he looked half-starved. Instead, his trembling hands reached into the front pocket of his jeans and pulled out a flattened, greasy piece of a discarded cardboard beer carton. In his other hand, he held a thick, blackened chunk of charcoal, likely scavenged from a nearby campsite fire pit. He dropped to his knees right there on the blistering asphalt. "What the hell is he doing?" Donnie muttered, tossing his cigarette away. "Let him be," Cole said softly, his eyes locked on the boy. The kid began to draw. He pressed the charcoal so hard into the cardboard that it snapped twice, but he didn't stop. He drew with a frantic, desperate energy, his breathing shallow and rapid. First he drew a straight, thick line the interstate. Then a curving line that broke away from it. He added crude but distinctive shapes, a rock formation that looked like 2 jagged teeth, a dead tree shaped like a twisted claw, and a circle with a cross through it. "That's Highway 15, Cole muttered, his brow furrowing as he recognized the local geography. "And that's the turnoff for the old ghost town road near Calico. The jagged rocks, that's the Devil's Bite." The boy nodded vigorously, his good eye welling with tears. He continued drawing. Past the rocks, past the circle, he drew an X. But it wasn't just an X. Around it he sketched something that made the blood freeze in Cole's veins. It was a crude depiction of a motorcycle recognizable by the high ape-hanger handlebars. Next to the motorcycle he drew a square box with vertical lines inside it bars. A cage, and inside the cage he drew stick figures. 3 of them, Then the boy looked up at Cole, pointed a trembling, soot-stained finger at the cage, and opened his mouth. No sound came out, but the sheer, unadulterated terror in his expression spoke volumes. He tapped the cardboard 3 times frantically. "He's Newt," Meat whispered, the giant's voice uncharacteristically soft, or too scared to speak. Cole stared at the map. The Hells Angels were not the police, they were not saviors. With 3 weeks ago, a prospect from a neighboring chapter, a kid named Jimmy Snake Henderson, had vanished on a run through this exact stretch of desert. The cops had chalked it up to a drunk crash in a ravine, but they hadn't found the bike or the body. "You're telling me there's someone out there?" Cole asked, his voice hardening into a low, dangerous gravel. The boy nodded. He grabbed Cole's thick, calloused finger and forced it onto the drawing of the cage, pressing it down hard. The kid's tears finally spilled over, leaving pale tracks in the dirt on his cheeks. Cole stood up. The oppressive heat of the desert suddenly felt cold. He looked at Donnie, then at Meat. No words were needed. The unspoken brotherhood, the code they lived by, dictated their next move. If a biker was out there, or if this kid had escaped from whatever hellhole he just drew, they weren't going to wait for the local sheriff to drag his feet. "Meat, take the kid inside the station. Buy him everything he wants to eat. Lock the door and don't let anyone but us near him," Cole ordered, swinging his heavy leg over the Harley. "Donnie, get Zeke and Rat. We're going for a ride." The roar of 4 heavy V-twin engines shattered the desert silence, echoing off the canyon walls as the Hells Angels tore off the main highway and onto a forgotten, unpaved utility road. Cole led the pack, the cardboard map tucked securely into his leather vest. Dust plumed behind them, a massive, choking cloud of alkaline sand that coated their bikes and their teeth. The terrain was brutal. Potholes the size of craters and jagged rocks threatened to blow their tires at every turn. But Cole pushed the speed, the heavy road glide bucking and sliding under him. The boy's desperate, bruised face was burned into his mind. 10 miles in, the landscape became utterly desolate. There was no cell service here, no signs of life, just the unforgiving expanse of the Mojave. "There!" Donnie yelled over the wind and the engines pointing to the left. Rising from the desert floor was a massive split rock formation, the Devil's Bite. The kid's map was flawlessly accurate. Cole signaled the pack, banking hard onto an even smaller, overgrown trail that wound through a dry riverbed. The heat radiating from the canyon walls was suffocating, like riding through a blast furnace. They passed the dead, twisted Joshua tree. Then the rusted remains of an old water tower, the circle with the cross through it on the map. The trail ended abruptly at a sheer cliff face. Below them, hidden from any road or aerial view by an overhang of jagged red rock, sat the remains of an abandoned silver mining camp from the 1890s. Most of the wooden structures had long since collapsed into splintered, sun-bleached piles. But tucked into the deepest shadow of the ravine was a long, low building made of heavily rusted corrugated steel. It looked like an old equipment shed, but something was wrong. Cole cut his engine. Donnie, Zeke, and Rat did the same. The swaggering enter at the sunned fines was heavy, ringing in their ears. "Look at the ground," Zeke muttered, unholstering a heavy .45 caliber pistol from his waistband. The dirt leading up to the steel building was churned up. There were fresh tire tracks, not thin motorcycle tires, but the heavy, deep treads of a dual-wheel truck. And woven through those tracks were drag marks. Long, continuous scuffs in the dirt, like heavy sacks of flour, had been pulled toward the structure. Cole drew his own weapon, a snub-nosed revolver, and nodded to his brothers. They moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency, fanning out and approaching the building from different angles. They were outlaws, veterans of brutal street wars. They knew how to flank a potential enemy. As they closed the distance, the smell hit them. It wasn't just the smell of decay. It was a suffocating chemical stench bleach, raw sewage, and the distinct coppery tang of old blood. It seeped through the cracks in the corrugated steel, thick enough to taste. Rat, the youngest of the group, gagged and pulled a bandana up over his nose. The heavy steel door of the building was chained shut from the outside with a massive, heavy-duty master lock. Cole gestured to Donnie. Donnie stepped forward, pulled a heavy steel crowbar from the saddlebag of his bike, and wedged it into the hasp. With a grunt of exertion, the veins in his neck bulging, Donnie threw his massive weight against the bar. The rusted metal of the building groaned, and with a sharp crack, the hasp tore free from the decaying steel. Cole kicked the door inward. It swung back, banging loudly against the wall, revealing a pitch-black interior. The heat inside the building was a physical assault, easily topping 120 degrees. The bikers kicked on heavy tactical flashlights, the powerful beams cutting through the dancing dust motes. At first it just looked like an old garage, rusted mining equipment, a broken generator. But then Cole's beam swept to the far corner, and his breath caught in his throat. Sitting under a rotting tarp was a customized Harley-Davidson. The chrome was dulled with dust, but the custom blue flame paint job was unmistakable. It was Snake Henderson's bike. Jesus Christ, Zeke whispered. But Snake wasn't there. Instead, right behind the motorcycle, the flashlights illuminated a heavy iron grate set into the concrete floor. It looked like an old storm drain or a ventilation shaft, but it had been recently modified. A brand new, heavy-duty padlock secured it, and from beneath the grate, barely audible over the sound of their own ragged breathing, came a sound that made the seasoned bikers freeze. It was a whimper, a soft, raspy, dehydrated sobbing. Cole knelt by the grate, shining his light down into the darkness. The beam illuminated a concrete drop of about 10 feet, leading down into what looked like an old subterranean storage bunker. As his eyes adjusted, the shadows below shifted. The kid's drawing of a cage hadn't been a metaphor. Below them, crammed into a rusted, makeshift iron cell, were people. They were huddled together in the filth, squinting up blindly at the glaring flashlight beam. They were emaciated, covered in dirt and sores, staring up with hollow, terrified eyes. And there weren't just 3 of them. There were at least a dozen. Women, teenagers, and men. And lying motionless in the corner of the cage, wearing the shredded, blood-stained remains of a leather vest, was Snake Henderson. "Donnie," Cole said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, dead calm. "Get the bolt cutters from the saddlebag, now." They hadn't just found a missing biker. The homeless kid's map had led the Hells Angels straight into the heart of a massive, active human trafficking ring, and judging by the sound of a heavy diesel engine suddenly rumbling to life somewhere up the canyon road, the people who ran it had just come back. The rumble of the diesel engine wasn't just loud. It vibrated through the rusted corrugated steel of the building and up through the soles of their boots. The heavy grinding sound of gears shifting echoed off the narrow canyon walls of the Devil's Bite, followed by the unmistakable crunch of heavy tires rolling over dry, baked gravel. Cole Higgins didn't hesitate. Survival in his world wasn't about luck, it was about instinct and overwhelming force. He snapped his fingers, a sharp cracking sound in the sweltering darkness of the shed. "Lights out. Positions." "Now," Cole hissed, his voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. The powerful tactical flashlights clicked off, plunging the shed back into a suffocating, terrifying gloom. Only a few dusty shafts of sunlight pierced through the bullet holes and rusted seams of the roof, illuminating swirling vortexes of alkaline dust. Donnie faded into the shadows behind the rusted generator, his heavy crowbar swapped for a modified, short-barreled shotgun he pulled from beneath his leather cut. Zeke and Rat, moving with the synchronized silence of men who had fought back-to-back in a dozen roadside bar brawls, flanked the heavy steel door. Cole took a position behind a massive, overturned iron ore cart near the center of the room, his snub-nosed revolver resting steadily on the rusted metal edge. He had a clear sight line to the entrance. Below them, in the subterranean cage, the whimpering had abruptly stopped. The captives recognized the sound of that truck. The suffocating silence of absolute terror seeped up through the floor grates. Outside, the heavy vehicle ground to a halt. The hissing release of air brakes was followed by the slamming of heavy truck doors. 1, 2, 3, 4 distinct slams. Heavy, steel-toed boots crunched on the gravel approaching the shed. "I'm telling you, the lock is busted. Look at this." A raspy, nicotine-stained voice yelled from outside. "Shut up and get your weapon up, Travis." A second, much deeper voice commanded. The authority in the tone was absolute, cold and professional. "Somebody found the trail. Fun out. Check the perimeter before we go in." Cole's grip tightened on his revolver. These weren't disorganized scavengers. The tactical commands, the disciplined movement. This was an organized trafficking ring, heavily armed and dangerously paranoid. In the criminal underworld of the Mojave, whispers had been circulating for months about a ruthless new crew operating out of San Bernardino County. They were a violent splinter group known as the Ironwood Syndicate, run by a disgraced former mercenary named Boyd Rollins. They dealt in everything: guns, narcotics, and, most profitably, human lives. A shadow fell across the threshold of the open steel door. A man stepped cautiously into the doorway, the silhouette of the military-style AR-15 rifle leading the way. He wore tactical gear over dusty jeans, a filthy bandana covering his face. He took one step into the sweltering heat of the shed. It was his last mistake. Zeke lunged from the blind spot behind the doorframe. He didn't fire his weapon. Gunfire would give away their numbers. Instead, Zeke swung a heavy steel motorcycle chain wrapped around his fist. The iron links connected with the side of the gunman's head with a sickening crack. The man folded instantly, dropping his rifle and collapsing like a puppet with its strings cut. But as the rifle hit the concrete, it discharged. A deafening 3-round burst shattered the tense silence, the bullets sparking wildly off the rusted ceiling. The element of surprise was gone. Contact inside the shed. "Light 'em up." The deep voice roared from the courtyard. The canyon erupted into absolute chaos. High-velocity rifle rounds tore through the thin, corrugated steel walls of the building, as if they were made of paper. Sunlight pierced through the fresh bullet holes, turning the dark interior into a strobe-lit nightmare of flying shrapnel, sparks, and choking dust. Cole flattened himself behind the iron ore cart as rounds pinged and ricocheted off the heavy metal. Suppressing fire, he bellowed over the deafening roar. Donnie racked his shotgun and stepped out from cover, firing blindly through the doorway. The booming roar of the 12-gauge buckshot echoed like cannon fire, forcing the attackers outside to dive behind the heavy steel wheels of their F-350 flatbed truck. Zeke and Rat opened up with their handguns, laying down a relentless wall of lead. The Hells Angels were heavily outgunned by the Syndicate's assault rifles, but what they lacked in firepower they made up for in sheer, unadulterated aggression. They were cornered tigers, and they fought with a terrifying, coordinated ferocity. "Donnie, flank," Cole barked, reloading his revolver with a speed born of muscle memory. Donnie didn't argue. While Cole, Zeke, and Rat laid down a deafening barrage of cover fire, Donnie threw himself toward a large, jagged hole in the rusted back wall of the shed. He squeezed his massive frame through the jagged metal, tearing his leather cut and shredding his forearm, but he tumbled out into the blinding desert sun. Outside, Boyd Rollins, a tall, heavily tattooed man with cold, dead eyes, was directing his 3 remaining men. "Keep them pinned. I'm going to drop a grenade through the roof." Rollins yelled, pulling a smooth, olive-drab sphere from his tactical vest. He never got the chance. Donnie rounded the corner of the shed like a freight train made of muscle and bad attitude. He pumped the shotgun and fired off a round that blew out the front left tire of the F-350, dropping the heavy truck and violently exposing the two syndicate gunmen hiding behind it. Before the traffickers could adjust their aim, Cole kicked the front door of the shed wide open. He stepped into the glaring sunlight, his revolver tracking smoothly. He fired twice. The first trafficker dropped his rifle, clutching his shattered shoulder, screaming in agony. The second man panicked, spinning wildly toward Donnie. Rat, stepping out right behind Cole, put a single .45 caliber hollow point round center mass. The trafficker hit the dirt and didn't move. Suddenly the firing stopped. The sudden silence was heavier and more deafening than the gunfire. The harsh desert wind whistled through the jagged bullet holes in the truck. Boyd Rollins stood by the back of the flatbed, the pin still half pulled on his grenade. He was staring down the barrels of 3 Hell's Angels while Donnie held his flank. The mercenary's cold eyes darted between the massive leather-clad bikers. He recognized the death head patches. He realized with a sinking horror exactly who he had cornered. "You boys are way out of your jurisdiction," Rollins spat, a desperate smirk playing on his lips, trying to bluff his way out. "You don't know whose money you're messing with." Cole Higgins walked forward slowly, his boots crunching loudly on the brass casings that littered the ground. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He walked straight up to Rollins, entirely ignoring the live explosive in the man's hand. "I don't care about your money," Cole said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried over the wind. "And I don't care about you." With a speed that defied his age and size, Cole swung the heavy barrel of his revolver directly into Rollins' jaw. The bone shattered with a sharp snap. Rollins collapsed, the grenade rolling harmlessly into the dust, the pin still intact. Donnie casually stepped forward and kicked the explosive away before zip-tying the unconscious mercenary's hands behind his back with industrial plastic cuffs he kept in his saddlebag. The courtyard was secure. The threat was neutralized. Cole didn't pause to celebrate. He turned sharply back to the bullet-riddled shed. "Get the bolt cutters, now." The heat inside the shed had grown even more oppressive, filled now with the acrid stench of cordite and pulverized concrete. Donnie hauled the heavy steel bolt cutters from his bike and threw himself at the padlock securing the subterranean grate. With a guttural roar, Donnie squeezed the massive handles. The hardened steel lock groaned, fought back, and finally snapped with a loud ping. Zeke and Rat grabbed the heavy iron grate, their muscles straining as they heaved it up and flicked it over. The foul, stagnant air of the pit rushed up to meet them, a horrifying cocktail of human misery. Cole dropped down into the pit first, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The cage was a nightmare. 14 people, 7 women, 4 men, and 3 teenagers were huddled together, shivering despite the boiling heat. They were severely dehydrated, their lips cracked and bleeding, their eyes wide with a trauma that would take years to heal. "It's okay," Cole said, his rough voice uncharacteristically gentle, stripping off his heavy leather cut to cover a young woman who was violently shaking. "It's over. You're getting out of here." Not. In the darkest corner of the rusted cell, Jimmy Snake Henderson lay motionless. Cole rushed to his brother, dropping to his knees in the filth. Snake's face was bruised beyond recognition, his breathing shallow and rattling. His ribs were clearly broken and dark, dry blood matted his hair. "Snake, hey kid, look at me," Cole commanded softly, patting the young man's uninjured cheek. Snake's eyes fluttered open. It took a moment for his unfocused gaze to register the towering figure of his chapter president. A weak, bloody smile cracked his swollen lips. Knew you'd come, boss. Knew always come," Cole said, his jaw tightening as Donnie and Zeke dropped into the pit to begin hauling the civilians up into the fresh air. "What the hell happened to you?" "Ambushed," Snake wheezed, every word costing him agonizing effort. "Stopped on the highway. Fake breakdown. They took the bike." tossed me down here. Said they sell me for parts across the border." Snake swallowed hard, his eyes suddenly filling with a frantic, desperate energy. He grabbed Cole's shirt with a trembling hand. "The kid, Cole. Did you find the kid?" Cole froze. The bruised, feral boy at the gas station flashed in his mind. "The map. Yeah, Snake. We found him. He drew us a map." How did he know? Tears mixed with the grime on Snake's face. "His name is Toby. He's Boyd's son. The boss up there. The kid saw what they were doing to us. He snuck down here 3 nights ago, brought us water through the bars when his old man was asleep." Snake coughed, a wet, horrible sound. "Boyd caught him, beat the living hell out of his own blood, threw him in the truck, said he was driving him out to the deep desert to leave him for the coyotes." The absolute silence in the pit was broken only by the ragged breathing of the Hell's Angels. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The boy hadn't just escaped. He was the son of the monster who ran this operation. He had endured a brutal beating and been left to die in the unforgiving Mojave, all because he tried to show mercy to strangers. And despite the heat, despite the pain, he had walked miles barefoot to a gas station, found a piece of trash, and drawn a map to save them. "Get Snake up, carefully," Cole ordered, his voice cold and hard as diamond. It took 45 minutes to get everyone out of the pit and stabilized in the shade of the canyon walls. Cole pulled a burner flip phone from his pocket. He didn't dial 911. You don't call dispatch for something like this. You call a fixer. He dialed a direct line to Detective Hank Reynolds of the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department, a man who understood that sometimes the law moved too slow and justice required a blind eye. "Hank, it's Cole Higgins," Cole said, walking away from the group. "I need multiple buses and a heavily armed extraction team out of the old silver mine at Devil's Bite. Right now." There was a pause on the line. "Cole, what did you boys do?" "We didn't do anything, Hank. We found something," Cole replied, staring at the bound, bloody form of Boyd Rollins lying in the dirt. "A major trafficking hub, 14 civilians. We racked it up in a bow for you. The leader is still breathing, barely. You have 20 minutes before we're gone." Cole hung up. The Hell's Angels didn't stick around for medals or statements. They strapped Snake securely to Donnie's broad back, fired up their Harleys, and left the syndicate traffickers bound in the dirt for the authorities. The ride back to the Barstow Chevron was silent. The desert sun was finally beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and blood red. When they pulled into the gas station, the massive frame of meat Gregory was sitting on the curb. Beside him, sitting on a milk crate and eating his 3rd ice cream sandwich, was the boy, Toby. The kid tensed as the 4 heavy bikes rumbled to a stop, his solitary good eye widening as he saw Snake strapped to Donnie's back. Cole dismounted slowly, his bad knee aching furiously. He walked over to the boy. Toby flinched, instinctively raising his skinny arms to protect his head, expecting a blow. Cole didn't raise his hand. Instead, he dropped to one knee on the asphalt. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the piece of greasy cardboard. The charcoal map was smeared but still legible. "You're a brave kid, Toby," Cole said softly. The boy gasped, shocked to hear his own name. "You saved a lot of lives today, including my brother's." Toby stared at Cole, his lower lip trembling. The tough, silent exterior he had built to survive his father finally cracked. He dropped his ice cream and threw his thin arms around Cole's massive neck, burying his face in the dirty leather of the biker's vest, sobbing uncontrollably. Cole awkwardly but firmly wrapped his giant arms around the frail boy. He looked up at his men. Meat, Donnie, Zeke, Rat, and the battered Snake all nodded silently. The unspoken code of their brotherhood had just expanded. "Nobody touches this kid ever again," Cole whispered into the evening air. a solemn vow that carried the weight of the entire Hells Angels motorcycle club. He rides with us now. This incredible story proves that heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they wear heavy leather cuts and ride Harley-Davidsons. A 10-year-old's immense bravery and a notorious biker club's unbreakable code brought down a nightmare. If this gritty, real-life tale of survival, loyalty, and justice kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable stories.